Hi, my name is Brianna Potts, and I'm going to be talking about the hashtag MeToo movement and intersectionality. So, in introduction, the hashtag MeToo movement was a pivotal movement for women in the wake of President Trump and his administration's rise to power. So, although this movement was used widely by white women starting soon after President Trump's administration came to power, the movement is less commonly known to have originated in 2006 by Tarana Burke on the MySpace platform to provide support to Black women who experience sexual violence, according to Lang and Williams from the Journal of Communication Inquiry. So the Me Too movement in 2006 by Tarana Burke was started on MySpace for women of color who were experiencing sexual violence. So she started this movement soon after there was a national march in 2004, and she thought it would be a great platform for women who were experiencing sexual assault to come together and feel solidarity. But unfortunately, her Me Too movement really didn't catch on and gain popularity throughout the vast majority of even the Black community. And so the hashtag Me Too movement in 2017 sort of caught momentum from Alyssa Milano, who was an actor who posted on Twitter. She said, "If you've experienced sexual assault, comment Me Too," and that's when the hashtag Me Too movement started. So the nature of the issue, to provide background on the magnitude of sexual violence, the World Health Organization states that an alarming percentage of women worldwide, 70%, had suffered from some sort of sexual violence in their lifetime. From an intersectional standpoint, American Indians are 2.5 times more likely to experience some sort of sexual abuse, and 1 in 3 American Indian women report experiencing rape during their life. So, looking at this from both a world and holistic approach, and also looking at this from a intersectional approach, is really important to understand the nature of this issue. So African Americans viewed the hashtag Me Too movement similarly to how they viewed the feminism movement. So they felt that the hashtag Me Too movement didn't really encompass their experiences with sexual assault, just sort of how they felt that the feminism movement didn't really encompass their experiences as Black women. So the Center for Disease Control reports that women of color experience sexual assault at a higher rate. So sexual assault can happen to both men and women, but the 2006 and 2017 Me Too movements were mainly focused on assault against women. Lynn Chaucer, the author of After the Rise and Fall of American Feminism, Taking Back a Revolution, wrote, "Rape has been a distinctive means of keeping women in check over the history of male-dominated societies, just as violence has been used as a means of maintaining social control over men and women in other contexts." So similar, as I talked about, to women of color's perspective of the feminist movement, the hashtag Me Too movement was overshadowed by white women and men who were victims and attackers. Tarana Burke explained that although she is thankful for the platform that so many women found to break their silence with the hashtag Me Too movement, Black women have been calling out R. Kelly and advocating for Anita Hill for years with no avail. Women of color are statistically more likely to experience sexual assault during their lives, but the hashtag Me Too movement only found success when it involved famous white women and men. So unfortunately, to the original feminist movement, it seems that only white women were being included in these events and movements. Understanding the 21st century discussion about women's reproductive rights from an intersectional approach can give background to these movements. So, in 2004, Sister Song and other women of color organizations were commissioned to help organize the March for Women's Lives, which became the United States' largest protest with 1.5 million participants. So this march was sort of what gave Tarana Burke a little bit of a platform on MySpace and a little bit of momentum to start her Me Too movement. This intersectional event was a dynamic precursor to the discussion about women's reproductive rights in regards to the Me Too movement of 2006. But even this 2004 movement was not the first work of women of color organizations. As early as the 1970s and 80s, women of color were struggling for reproductive rights and advocating for women. In 1974, the National Welfare Rights Organization and the Southern Poverty Law Center advanced a case against an Alabama organization that involuntarily sterilized two African American sisters aged 12 and 14 without their parents' knowledge. Women of color have been fighting for reproductive rights for years. This fact, mixed with the erasure of Tarana Burke's movement, was why the hashtag #MeToo movement felt like such a slap in the face to women of color in 2017. So there was another case in 2014 leading up to the hashtag #MeToo movement's success. It was the Hobby Lobby case of 2014. And although the Hobby Lobby case did not deal with rape and sexual assault allegations, it was a setback to all women who have been working for reproductive rights since the 1970s, regardless of their race or sexual orientation. So this Burwell versus Hobby Lobby case debated whether companies should have to pay for contraceptive measures in their healthcare policies. Hobby Lobby stated that paying for contraceptive measures under their healthcare was a violation of their religious affiliation as a company. The court ruled in favor of Hobby Lobby. This setback could have been a leading factor to the rise of the 2017 hashtag #MeToo movement. So one of the things that we'll discuss in this presentation are what led up to the 2006 #MeToo movement, what led up to the 2017 hashtag #MeToo movement, and how what led up to those movements could have affected their success. And then we'll also discuss whether it was just the timing and the preceding events that caused the hashtag #MeToo movement to be more of a success, or if it was an issue of erasure and race. So many women in the United States across the world recognize the hashtag #MeToo movement originating in 2017 when actress Alyssa Milano took to Twitter to ask women who had been sexually abused to comment "Me Too." This request created a landslide of women breaking their silence and finding a newfound solidarity. This movement came at a time where women felt marginalized after a man who was recorded admitting to sexual harassment was elected president, according to Gibson of Humanity and Society. Lawmakers took a closer look at women's rights, especially after Brett Kavanaugh was a subject in the hashtag #MeToo movement. Sexual assault allegations are now taken more serious, and they are now coming out from under the rug in hordes. So was the #MeToo movement perfectly timed in a perfect storm to gain momentum in 2017 rather than catching on in 2006 when it originally started, or is this an issue of whitewashing yet again? So here in my presentation I will show a video, but because of the time constraints that I have on Screencast-O-Matic, I won't be showing the video during this presentation, but this presentation was from Tarana Burke, who was the original founder of the #MeToo movement in 2006. She basically discusses, in her opinion, that the 2017 hashtag #MeToo movement was an issue of whitewashing, and why she thinks that. So in my original presentation for this class, I had a discussion question in this video. So if you do want to watch this video, you can always click on this link. But what surprised you about this video if you do watch it, and was there anything that you didn't know about Tarana Burke's #MeToo movement? So if you feel like watching that, it's a TED Talk by Tarana Burke. But for my purpose of this presentation, I will skip over that since I only have 15 minutes for screencast. And I am also going to just check really quick. Okay, I have 6 minutes left. So the nature of this issue in regards to the benefits and challenges. So there were a lot of benefits to the 2006 #MeToo movement. So in the Stein Scholar Symposium in Cleveland, Ohio, presenters and panelists, including Tarana Burke, the woman that we just saw in the preview to that video, and the woman who started the hashtag #MeToo movement in 2006, sought to answer the aforementioned questions of whether the hashtag #MeToo movement was just in a perfect storm of all of these things happening, that's why it caught on, or if it was an issue of whitewashing. So Burke said specifically the movement has merited criticism not only for initially ignoring the contributions of women of color to the creation of the movement, but even more for ignoring the unique forms of harassment and the heightened vulnerability that women of color frequently face in the workplace. According to Burke, it wasn't a matter of timing so much as a matter of racial inequality and lack of intersectionality. So, although there is an article that explains that the safety of more advanced social media, Twitter is more technically advanced than MySpace, and it's easier just to type in "me too" in Twitter than it was in MySpace. The election of President Trump and the investigative nature of the New York Times into sexual harassment and abuse on a wider scale was one of the reasons that the 2017 Me Too movement caught on more than the 2006 Me Too movement. So I'm going to skip a little bit ahead in my presentation here, just because we do have those time constraints. But notable benefits of the 2006 Me Too movement were that it provided a platform specifically for people of color to join the dialogue about sexual assault. Burke explained that her movement brought awareness to sexual assault that women of color face that may be covered up by white, more famous sexual assault victims. So her movement was ahead of the curve. She wrote, "What history has shown us time and again is that if marginalized voices, those of people of color, queer people, disabled people, poor people, aren't centered in our movements, then they tend to become no more than a footnote." She explained that her movement helped women of color and those marginalized voices become more part of history than a footnote. Her movement helped provide solidarity among women of color who felt otherwise isolated in their stories, traumas, and experiences. So there are notable benefits of the hashtag MeToo movement. It provided this huge platform to women to talk about sexual assault that had been for so long swept under the rug. And I'm just going to check my time one more time. All right, we're doing good. So according to the New York Times, 43% of famous male figures, bosses, or men in the workplace who were accused of sexual assault and lost their jobs during the hashtag MeToo movement had their jobs replaced by women. So that is a notable benefit of the hashtag MeToo movement. It brought to light all of these issues surrounding women's rights, sexual assault, and it also related to other movements that came before it. So reproductive rights movements, women's health movements, and the March for Women's Lives preceded this transformative movement, which is also a notable benefit. So there is a quote by an author from the feminist women's health movement that wrote, "Political frameworks do not emerge wholly formed without connections to previous movements. But there are challenges to the hashtag MeToo movement. As we talked about before, it was very non-intersectional, so it did not provide a platform for women of color and was really dominated by white women. It did tend to villainize men to a certain extent. There's a statistic that said 20% of adolescent girls and 45% of college women report being the perpetrator in some sort of sexual assault. So the hashtag MeToo movement could have silenced men who wanted to open up about their sexual assault, but felt that they couldn't because the hashtag MeToo movement was very geared towards women. And as we talked about before, this movement had a completely different meaning to people who were not white, not straight, and who did not fit into the gender binary. So I'm going to skip ahead to possible solutions since I only have about 2 minutes left. So possible solutions, according to Tarana Burke, is check your privilege and be an ally to marginalized groups. Be aware when erasure is occurring, so be aware that if you're part of something that feels like erasure, if it feels like it's geared towards just one population, be aware of that. And she's not criticizing anyone for that, but it's just something to be aware of. She said, Tarana Burke said, "It is imperative that white cis hetero people with disruptors, or people be disruptors, to stand up against the wrongs perpetrated on marginalized bodies by white systems." She said, "White silence is violence." And be mindful that sexual assault can happen to men too. So in conclusion, we talked about the differences between the 2006 Me Too movement and the 2017 hashtag Me Too movement. We talked about whether it was an issue of race or timing in the 2017 movement's success, and we talked about the importance of intersectionality. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm sorry I had to rush through the end of that. There is only so much time on screencast. Reach out to me if you have any questions. Thank you.